For Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Motshabi Hoaeane. Researcher and analyst Professor Raymond Suttner discusses violence and defending constitutionalism in the South African socio-political context. Thank you, Professor, for your
Thank
time.
you.
In referring to the Beckerstyle opposition to ANC canvassing and use of firearms, you suggest that both police and the intelligence services should have known what type of resistance and what level of anger and danger would be encountered. Is there not a danger in using intelligence services for such purposes?
You see, I think that in any democracy, you still do need intelligence services. And when we complain about intelligence services, what we complain about is intelligence services being used to undermine democracy, to spy on people, to dig up dirt about opponents of the government and things like this, and feed that into disinformation, things like that. But why I mention intelligence services is if you plan as an organization or as a government to go into an area which may possibly pose dangers to public order and to the lives of these politicians, what you need to do is find out what is going on. And that is the job of intelligence services, crime intelligence as well as ordinary intelligence services, to find out what exactly is happening. What are they preparing to do? Have they put burning tires there? Have they got ammunition? They should know all the guns. They should know all of these things before they go there. So that if they know, or they can't know everything, but if they know much more than they will know from their desks, then they can also prepare their response and know whether it will be possible to negotiate with these people, whether they will have to shoot shots into the air, and what measures they can take which are least overt use of force, or least or minimum use of force, or no use of force at all.
How would you have liked the Gauteng ANC and government to have addressed the resistance they encountered, therefore?
See, what has happened now is that we've had a series of protests during the year which have been around basic needs. And basic needs are a constitutional right. Now, instead of them meeting constitutional political authorities, in the main, protesters have met up with the police. So there's been a confrontational situation which is not conducive to debate, negotiation, to listening, providing answers, things like that. So what I feel is unfortunate is that people use their guns. We don't know whether anyone was actually shot. It did appear that that policeman was just about to shoot someone. We have not seen what happened to the person. We don't know what happened off camera. Nevertheless, even if no one was shot, it's not conducive to resolving problems in a peaceful way to bring out the guns. What the ANC needed to do, in my view, is to have the Premier apologize publicly, because there's no way that you can say to a community who are living in dirt and muck, not through their own choice, living in squalid conditions, you say to them, we don't want your dirty vote. That pours insult on injury. And that there hasn't been a public apology means that that community will be very angry. Now, one is aware that there is some degree of tension between the Gauteng ANC and the Gauteng government, and that could have made it difficult for them to have collaborated on what is happening. But nevertheless, in the interests of democracy, in the interests of securing the peace, it would have been desirable to have them make gestures which meant that the community felt that their outrage was heard and that the Premier withdrew unreservedly what she had said.
You say that the principle of non-violence is not grounded in South Africa. Why is this, and how can we ensure that it is respected?
You see, we need to look back to 1990. When the ANC and other organizations were unbanned, it did not inaugurate a period of peace. From the beginning, there were not level playing fields. A number of forces were unleashed against the ANC and against communities that were perceived as backing the ANC. We had a number of massacres. We had the killing of Hoaeane. We had things that people may not remember anymore. There were random attacks on trains. People going down trains in Soweto, from Johannesburg to Soweto, just shooting people. Now, I later learned that in Belgium, around this time, there were random attacks on trains, and they later found that fascist groups had been involved in that. So that there's no doubt that the directly political attacks, like the attacks on the ANC itself, the attacks on ANC supporting communities or African communities in general, were political. But it appears that these apparently random acts of terrorism in trains were actually politically motivated. There's also evidence from this period that Chief Buthelezzi's IFP was getting funds from military intelligence. It was proved then. So that there was a lot of evidence that the state, the Nationalist Party and the state were using their resources to destabilize the ANC. There was something called a so-called third force. It was not done directly by the South African Defence Force or police force, but while the ANC believed that the government was responsible, they claimed there was no proof that they were not in their own uniforms. So we had a situation where people came into the period prior to elections and it was difficult to build peace. In fact, when Mandela went to these communities, they said, "Give us guns or defend us from these people." Then in that situation, the ANC built self-defense units quite hastily. So some of these self-defense units were themselves dangers, but there was a need for people to defend themselves. So to preach non-violence when there was a massacre at Boipatong, massacre at Bisho and other places was not really possible. Consequently, we have never really had the opportunity to enshrine in people's minds the value of peace. It also goes along with South African culture. Historically, the way things have been achieved in South Africa have been through force of arms, through might is right. And that's what people have learned, that if you want to achieve something, use force. If you want to defend what you've got, you have to use force. And that is the climate which is unconducive for building a principle of nonviolence.
And how do we ensure that this is respected, this respect for justice, respect for peace? How do we ensure that is respected?
See, we need now to start looking at what is the rationale behind people saying, people like Gandhi, Martin Luther King, and others saying that nonviolence is an unconditional good. And I would say that one of the bases on which you argue is that if you're going to shoot someone, that person becomes devoid of human qualities. He or she becomes an object. You use your active subjectivity as a human being in order to attack another one, either with your fists or with guns, and that person becomes an object in order to realize a goal of your own. This is most obviously the case in war, where you don't even know who you're shooting. You just shoot, and someone falls, and that person is a thing, really, in your eyes. So we need to explain to people that when you build relations between people, whether between husband and wife and others, there needs to be this respect of the humanity of the other. When you attack someone, you snuff out that humanity. So we need to build that.
Thank you so much, Professor. That was Raymond Suttner on means to address disputes and violence in a constitutional state.